Hello, everybody. I actually have a little housekeeping task I forgot to do that I have to do very quickly here. I was so excited talking about birds with Tom and Laurel before the meeting officially started that I wasn't doing my job. All right, there we go. That's done now. All right, so welcome everyone officially to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers for August 13th. It's great to see you all here, especially Brody, since you requested the subject matter for this meeting. So I'm glad you're here. So, I would have to switch out some other subject matter so we could save the Thrashers and Blackbirds for later when you were here. But since you're here, we can go ahead with Thrashers and Blackbirds by request. Let's see, I wanted to just briefly go over a few housekeeping things. You all know how to do the Zoom thing, so I won't talk about that. Your co-hosts for the meeting are Tom Beland and Laurel Luby. Laurel is invisible because she's watching the YouTube live stream. She's actually slightly visible on the side of Tom's window there. And Tom, are you letting people in from the waiting room as they show up? I see we've got a few people still there, so thank you. You can get them in here. We don't want to let anybody miss out on the awesome content. So my few little bits of housekeeping, I wanted to mention a few news things about birds that have come up in the last few weeks that are sort of on topic. In the past, we've been talking about the little bit about the Bird Names for Birds initiative. This is the people making the case that some of the eponymous birds, the birds named after people, should not be named after people. And this is a cause that some people have taken up. And just in the last week, the American Ornithological Society basically agreed, at least with respect to the bird formerly known as the McCown's longspur. Their North American naming committee, I forget what it's actually officially called, announced that they're going to rename that bird the thick-billed longspur. So you can look forward to that change in your field guides. McCown's longspur will be no more, and the thick-billed longspur will take its place. And the longspurs will not notice any of this. They'll just go about their lives. And, this was met with a lot of excitement from the very online birder community that had been pushing for this. And then they turned around and said, well, that's one species down, 149 species to go. So expect there to be more excitement in that area in the years ahead. I also wanted to mention there was a article that I saw that talked about a recent study. In the past, we had talked about the 3 billion birds lost study that came out, and sort of a lot of concern around the issue of large numbers of birds declining in the last few decades in North America. And in particular, grassland birds were heavily affected. And so there was a follow-up study that came out just recently that talked about an apparent connection between neonicotinoid pesticides, this certain class of pesticides that have become pretty popular in recent years, that this is playing a role in the decline of grassland bird species. So, and I'm putting links to all these things in the description for this YouTube video and in the blog post at carpwithoutcars.org about this meeting. So if you want to read more about that, you can check that out, and I encourage you to do that. And then the last piece of follow-up, we talked in a previous meeting or two about the logging proposal for Reyes Ridge in the Los Padres National Forest. And this is just across the border in Ventura County, but sort of east of Highway 33. If you go off that way along the upper elevations of that ridge, there's a Jeffrey pine forest and a lot of really neat habitat. And there is a proposal to do this sort of fast track logging and brush clearing project there without going through the normal environmental review process. And local birders and others, especially the Los Padres Forest Watch organization, have been very active in pushing back against that. And there was an extension as a result of some of this pushing back on the time during which you can enter public comments. So if you have not entered a public comment and you're concerned about this issue, I encourage you to go enter a public comment. It's very easy to do. There's a link at the Los Padres Forest Watch page that I linked to in the blog post, and just takes a few minutes. And the actual deadline, the extended deadline for that is tomorrow. So this is your last chance to get those public comments. And then, hopefully that will help make the case that we shouldn't just be setting the requirements of NEPA aside. I see Andrea is asking about Linnea in the chat. So yeah, I have about 15 t-shirts that are like merchandise for my son's band, his rock band and Linnea is William's band. So I'm a fan of Linnea, and partly because of that, and mostly because I live with him and just have access to a big piles of band merch t-shirts. I have a large assortment of Linnea t-shirts, so it often happens that I'm wearing a Linnea t-shirt. I encourage you to listen to them. It probably is not going to be right in the mainstream for people who are members of Carpinteria Birdwatchers. It's fun stuff, but different from what I'm used to listening to, certainly. But I've come to appreciate it more with time. Anyway, we won't talk about Linnea anymore in this meeting. We'll go on and talk about birds. There was another comment in the chat. I just want to look at that real quick and make sure I'm keeping up with everything. Oh, Catherine Moody has a question in the chat. There used to be hundreds of blackbirds in my neighborhood near the salt marsh. Where did they all go? That's an excellent question. There are flocks of blackbirds around in Carpinteria, and sort of down at the south end of Linden is the place I usually see them, right there by the beach in Linden Field. I'm not expert enough to tell you, is this just a seasonal variation or is this some larger trend? But it's an interesting question, and certainly we're going to talk about blackbirds a bunch tonight. And if any of you are inspired to go down to the end of Linden or anywhere else around Carpinteria where there are a lot of blackbirds and check them out and sift through those flocks and see what species we have and put in eBird lists, that would be great. And because then I could see your eBird lists and see what's going on without having to go there myself. Let's see, anything else? Oh, I see. So Catherine, you're saying that the birds have been gone for a while, like there were previously a lot more of them and now there are fewer. Yeah. Well, that is an unfortunate part of the reality of this, decline in bird species. That study, that came out I guess now close to 6 months ago, talked about. But certainly keeping track of that and paying attention to what's going on with those birds is an important part of how people can help, from the citizen science and with noticing those trends, and hopefully that leads to people paying attention to it and figuring out what can be done about it and then doing those things. Okay, well, any other questions or comments about anything not on the subject of tonight's meeting before we go on to Thrashers and Blackbirds? Yeah, Brody, I see you have your hand up.
Two things. One, have you ever seen a golden eagle in Santa Barbara County?
I have indeed seen a golden eagle in Santa Barbara County. I think I have seen golden eagles in 2 places in Santa Barbara County. One place in particular where I've seen golden eagles fairly frequently. Actually, I just realized I saw golden eagles, 2 of them in Santa Barbara County just last weekend, is out near the hills south of Lompoc. So if you go out there and go out like to Miguelito Canyon, and there's Miguelito County Park, but if you go further, you come to this sort of wide open grassy area, which unfortunately at the moment is being turned into a large wind farm, and there's a lot of earth moving equipment out there, and they've graded many acres of what used to be ground squirrels and raptors flying around, taking advantage of the ground squirrels. I didn't see any there, but on my drive back, so going along Highway 1 between Lompoc and Gaviota, basically, as a, like kind of where the road that goes to Halama Beach turns off. Right as I was driving through there, 2 golden eagles flew over my car. This was on Sunday, early Sunday afternoon. So that was really exciting. And, you know, I was driving, I couldn't really give them a good look, but I saw them well enough to see that's what they were. You know, one older looking one and one immature looking one. And that was pretty neat. And then the other place in Santa Barbara County that I have seen golden eagles before is up in the Cuyama Valley. There's a place called Santa Barbara Canyon, and you can kind of go up in there. And my understanding is that golden eagles have nested there in previous years. I'm not sure exactly where, but that's another place you can tend to see them. And they're, you know, they're big eagles. They fly around. You can see them various places. You know, they're just, check out all those big circling raptors. And if you see one that looks like twice as big as the red-tailed hawks, you go, wait a second, that's not a red-tailed hawk.
Yeah, because I was just going on a little pad. It like folds into something, and it's birds of Santa Barbara County. Yeah, and I saw a golden eagle on there, and I was just like, I have never seen a golden eagle in Santa Barbara County.
They are out there. I think I think people may have seen a golden eagle on occasion during the fall hawk watches that we do right along the front of the Santa Ynez Mountains, the south side of the Santa Ynez Mountains.
Yeah.
So in like September and October, those of us who are particularly avid about you know, keeping track of all these things, we'll go up there and watch the hawks in migration as they kind of come south through the county. And I think people have seen golden eagles up there as well, which is basically right around where you guys live. So,
Yeah.
you know, keep looking up. There's a good chance, you know, one will come flying over in the fall.
Yeah.
And you said there were 2 things. What was your other thing?
My other thing was the greater roadrunners. What happened to them? There used to be a lot around here, my grandfather and my dad said.
Yeah, I can't tell you. I mean, I've never seen them in big numbers, but I've certainly seen them around. I think the ones I've seen most recently around here were at the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. You know, there was 1 or more of them there. I know Rob Denholtz, you know, talked about them a lot because, I mean, he lives down there in the Silver Sands Mobile Home Park. And they're, you know, like I said, I've never seen them in big numbers, but yeah, I don't know. You know, good question.
Neither do I. I just wanted to know if you've still been seeing a lot, or
Not a lot of them. I actually saw one at this place with the new wind farm construction going on. That was sort of the neatest bird I saw. There was a really nice view of a roadrunner on a fence post just as I pulled up. So yeah, you know, there are some of them out there, and I always get excited when I see them. But yeah, I don't see them as often as I'd like to.
Yeah. One last thing, sorry.
Okay.
What do you know what the white-breasted nuthatch is? If it's like a finch, or like, do you know what it is?
Well, I mean, nuthatches are in a separate family, I want to say. I would have to consult my field guide. Yeah, I'm, you know, again, not a super expert birder. I'm a, you know, enthusiastic amateur, so I don't have a strong ornithological background where I could say, oh yes, taxonomically they are right here in the tree. And, you know, they're their own separate deal. You know, nuthatches are kind of their own little grouping. But I'm not sure exactly where they fall with respect to finches and some of the other ones.
And last time when I said they ate the peanuts, they're like the little halves of them, not the whole big peanut.
Just like the shelled peanut, like the actual sort of kernel, right? The peanut proper, not the big shelled part.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that update. Okay, anything else before we go on? Going once. Okay, going twice. So let's move on, and I will move on to the presentation and see if I can figure out which window to share. I think this one. Okay, so if I've done this correctly, you are seeing a thrasher and a blackbird. And do one more thing. Okay, so this was fun. You know, as I said before, you suggested this, Brody, and at first I thought, well, I mean, what do they have in common? But, you know, as I've worked on putting this together, it's like, you know, they do have some things in common. Again, they're not really super close in terms of the official ornithological taxonomy, but they're both, you know, sort of medium-sized, and they're fine with people. They're what Nick Letheby in that meeting about shorebirds a few meetings ago called confiding, right? They allow themselves to be seen. They're not hiding away necessarily. And they tend to associate, a lot of them tend to be in human environments and sort of suburban habitats, so we see them a lot. But they're kind of medium-sized. Their beaks are sort of medium length, medium thickness. You know, they're just kind of medium in a lot of ways. And so it was a, you know, I think a really fun group to look at. I learned a lot in getting ready for this. So I'll talk about them. I'm not going to do too much in terms of generic fun facts about the two groups of birds. I'm just going to get right into the species so we can go through them. But just, you know, to point out quickly, we've got thrashers, you know, generically speaking, including birds who don't have thrasher in their name like this one. And then blackbirds, and I've got some sort of blackbird adjacent species I've thrown in there as well. So I think we end up with about 10 species we're going to talk about. So not too many, but they're a lot of fun. And I'll just jump right in. So here's the eBird histogram. So this is the, you know, the frequency with which these species show up in eBird checklists in Santa Barbara County during each week in the year. And these are all the thrashers, broadly defined, that show up in Santa Barbara County's eBird lists. I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm just going to talk about the three most common ones you see here. And as you look at this, you can see that northern mockingbird is very commonly reported in eBird checklists in Santa Barbara County throughout the year. California thrasher may be a little bit thinner line, but still pretty frequently reported. And then the sage thrasher is a lot harder to see in Santa Barbara County and kind of disappears during the breeding season. We have it in the fall and winter and the early spring. So we're just, you know, maybe in a month or so is when you'll be able to go see a sage thrasher in Santa Barbara County if you want to do that. And we'll start with this species. And I have a recording. So all these recordings are from xenocanto.org. Oh, and this was another thing that they had in common. I found as I was putting this together that thrashers and blackbirds have some really cool vocalizations. So they sort of are, you know, they're vocal. They're little chatterboxes. So this species, here's a call. This is a recording from Xenocanto by Bobby Wilcox. So give me a thumbs up if you're hearing that. So make sure I shared this properly. All right, thank you. They say that's a typical call of this species. And then here is a typical song. This is a recording by Sue Riff. I'm guessing most of you have guessed by now, this is a northern mockingbird. And, you know, birders talk about their spark birds, the birds that got them started in bird watching. Northern mockingbird was my spark bird. One of my earliest bird watching memories is being out in the backyard of the home we lived in then with my grandmother, who was a bird watcher. And I was little, I was maybe, you know, 5 or 6 years old at the most. But she pointed out a mockingbird to me and she was talking about it. He said, oh, that's a mockingbird. And you can tell when it flies, it'll have these white flashes in its wings. And in my memory, at least, I was skeptical of this prediction. But then when it flew, it had white flashes in its wings. So I was impressed. And that was the beginning of my bird watcher experience. So here are some photos of northern mockingbirds displaying their white patches in their wings. And in terms of behavior, they use those white patches to accomplish things. So this is on the left, this is a male mockingbird singing, and this is a display flight that they'll often do, where it's singing from a prominent perch, and they will fly up in the air while they're singing and continue to sing, and then come down and, you know, displaying their wing patches as they're doing it. And then this photo on the right, whoops, we'll go back. This photo on the right is a thing they do where they flash their wings as they're hunting in grass. And you'll see them doing this on the lawn if you see a mockingbird. And they tend to live around human habitats, pretty readily. So we see them a lot in our neighborhoods. But they'll be running across the lawn and they will stop and they will jerk their wings open and kind of flash these white patches. And the explanation that I've seen for this is that they are trying to startle insects into movement so they can spot an insect and grab it. So this is a hunting strategy that they have. And they're just fun to listen to. I love listening to them sing. They are, as per their name, they are mimics. They mimic other birds, and probably as much as any bird we have around here, they will mimic other birds, and not just birds. They'll mimic car alarms and wolf whistles and who knows what. Like, you listen to a mockingbird, and especially as you get more familiar with the birds in the area, you will start to recognize what they are imitating, and it's kind of fun to go, oh, now it's doing a flicker. Oh, now it's doing a robin. Now it's doing a car alarm. Now it's doing a cell phone. They just like to mimic different kinds of sounds. Here is the eBird sightings map for where you find them in Santa Barbara County. And you can see you find them pretty much anywhere there's human habitation. You tend to find them. They're not so much up in the mountains, up in the chaparral or the areas away from people, but they're around, certainly down here in Carpinteria, and pretty much throughout the county. Anywhere there's people, you're going to see mockingbirds. And I will go ahead and take a look at the status and trends distribution animation, which is always fun. So this is, again, from eBird, and it kind of shows you the locations as these birds move around through the course of the year. And you can see, mockingbirds do migrate in a sense, like they expand into the, up in farther into more of the country during the breeding season, and then they retreat in the winter. But they're pretty much always around where we are. Our mockingbirds pretty much can just stay put. All right, and then we'll go on to this species. I'm going to have a recording of this one as well. Here is a call. This is a recording by Paul Marvin. A fun thing with these Xenocantha recordings, there's a lot of background species. So there's a gull in the background. I think it's probably a western gull. I'm not sure why there's a western gull in the background. And then here is a song recording. This is by Lance Benner. Species in there. There's like a lesser goldfinch and a yellow rumped warbler, probably some other stuff. And it's kind of interesting. So you can hear that song. It's similar to a mockingbird in the sense that it is mimicking some other birds, and it does vary its song, a lot as it's singing, like a mockingbird does. But also it's got a little bit of a different quality. It's a little more of a buzzy quality, and it doesn't have quite the range of variation that the mockingbird has. And this is our California thrasher. Right? So it's a little bigger than a mockingbird. It's got a longer, more strongly curved beak. That's your real, classic thrasher beak it has there. And they use that for like digging in the dirt and digging in leaf litter for insects. And these birds live in chaparral. This was kind of fun. So this was a California thrasher that I saw up at Ocean Beach Park, west of Lompoc. And I wanted to share the eBird list because I took a bunch of photos of what it was doing. And it was just really cool. So what this thrasher is doing, I believe, is it was hunting, like it had nestlings it was feeding. So these photos are all in sequence. So it had a whole bunch of grubs that it had found in the ground that it was carrying around in its beak. And then it would set them down. This is it dropping the grubs, like it's releasing them so it can go dig for more. And there it is digging. And eventually it would pick them all up again, like presumably it would catch another one and then pick them all up. So, you know, oh, sorry, that's another bird. That's a song sparrow. So I thought that was fun. And just seemed like a cool thing that this bird was doing, you know, that it would, just, that seemed like a sort of intelligent, interesting behavior. You know, it wasn't just catching one insect and taking it back to its nest, you know, presumably it had a nest full of lots of babies it needed to feed. So it was gathering multiple ones, but it would put them down so it could find another one and then pick them all up again. Here is its distribution. And in this case, you see they actually do extend up into the sort of chaparral areas in the mountains. They are pretty much a chaparral species or a coastal sage scrub species. So not so much in our neighborhoods, but in the more natural areas in between our neighborhoods. But there's still, there's a lot of California thrashers around human habitation. They're not super shy. I'll take a quick look at their status and trends. So you can see they're very much a California specialty. You know, you're not finding those elsewhere. And they're not really migrating. They're pretty much staying in place. It is interesting how the abundance figures as reported in eBird kind of go up in the early months of the year, and then kind of, as the colors fade, that means, a lower percentage of them being reported. And I have to think that's, they're probably breeding early in the winter months, which is kind of when the birds in the chaparral of California tend to breed, because that's when there's water and insects and stuff. So I think they're more obvious then, because they're teed up in bushes singing and announcing their presence, and they're harder to miss, so they show up in a greater fraction of the checklist being submitted. But presumably they're still there the rest of the year. They're just not as easy to see. All right, and we'll go on to this species. And let's see, I have some recordings of this. This is a recording by Ron Overholtz. So here's some typical calls, and here are some songs. This is a recording by Ted Floyd. So again, to me, that's kind of evocative of a Mockingbird song. I've heard Mockingbird sing a lot growing up, because pretty much anywhere I've lived in California, there's been Mockingbird singing, sometimes in the middle of the night when we're trying to sleep. They're famous for singing at night. But that's a little different, not quite as varied as the Mockingbird song, but sort of similar. This is the sage thrasher. And this is a species that very much lives in the sagebrush, and they actually breed throughout the Great Basin, sort of the deserty areas of the American West, the interior of the American West, west of the Rockies and east of the Sierras. But we do get them. And as you remember from that histogram we looked at earlier, not so much in the breeding season, but outside the breeding season. And the easiest place to see them in Santa Barbara County is up here in the Cuyama Valley. That is certainly where I have tended to see them the most. But also they do sometimes show up, along the coast and in Carpinteria. Like I have seen them in Carpinteria before. It's always very exciting, like, oh wow, sage thrasher. You're just going to get individuals, but fall is a good time to see them show up. So you see something that looks sort of like a mockingbird, but spotted on the chest. Maybe check it out and see if it's a sage thrasher. And I guess I'll look at this status and trends real quick too, because I really like these. So here you can see how they, how they migrate. Basically, they move up into the northern Great Basin for breeding, and then they sort of retreat to the south in the winter months. And never really, hanging out in Santa Barbara County at any great number, but a little bit in the winter, they'll see there's just a few of them where they do tend to show up in the inland parts of Santa Barbara County. Okay, so that is it for thrashers. Before I go on to the blackbirds, are there questions or comments? You're all very good about keeping yourselves muted, so it's not as distracting for me, but I do sometimes feel like I'm just talking to myself, and it's a little bit, I don't know, like I get nervous. I feel like, have they all left? Are they still there? Any sort of questions or comments about thrashers in general? You're just all very excited to hear about blackbirds. Blackbirds are fun. All right, we'll go on to blackbirds. So I did lump in starlings. I kind of threw them. They're technically not blackbirds, but I included them in there because conceptually, at least for me, I think of them as being like blackbirds. They are sort of dark and they do kind of hang out in big flocks and sometimes associate with blackbird flocks. So I kept them in that group. And blackbirds technically are part of a larger group that includes orioles, but we've handled orioles separately already, so I didn't include the orioles here. So this is just blackbirds and things like blackbirds, like grackles, sort of like really big blackbirds. I didn't include bobolinks, which are kind of rare species for Santa Barbara County that do occasionally occur. But if we were being very, very thorough about covering all these species, we would maybe have thrown bobolinks in here too. But I didn't bother. I want to keep the list kind of manageable. And I am going to talk about all of these species except for the common grackle. There's really just a small handful of records of those in Santa Barbara County ever. So I'm going to skip them. But I will talk about all these other species. And let's see. And if you just look at the thickness of the bars to get a sense for which of these are most commonly encountered in our county. So starlings, quite common throughout the county. Red-winged blackbirds, common throughout the county. Brewer's blackbird, same thing. Brown-headed cowbird, starting to get a little thinner, but you can definitely still find them if you're out there looking for them. Great-tailed grackle have sort of been expanding in the county over the last few decades. So there's a decent chance you can see those, especially if you know where they hang out. You can go there, and they're pretty noisy and obvious. So they're pretty fun to look at and easy to find. And then yellow-headed blackbird, you have to work a lot harder to see those. They do just show up in ones and twos sometimes throughout the county. And if you see one, it's very exciting, at least for me. And there's a few places you can go to really try and find them. That sometimes works. And then let's see, tricolored blackbirds, again, even less common. And those are kind of fun. You really need to know where they are. And again, there's certain parts of the county where you can find them. And if you are lucky, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of them. But you have to kind of seek them out. And then rusty blackbirds are rarities that once in a while show up. And one was in Carpinteria last winter. So I probably would not have included it on the list, except that one showed up locally, and so that got me excited. And I thought, oh, I should share that in case another one shows up. You'll have been, armed with information about how to spot a rusty blackbird. All right, but let's go on. So we'll start with this bird. Here is a recording by Thomas Graves. Here's another recording by Thomas Berkman. And I have one more recording, and this is a recording of this species young in a nest. They're cavity nesters, and if you're near one of their cavity nests during the breeding season, you'll often hear this. That's their fledglings begging for food. These are, of course, European starlings, or if you're in Europe, they're common starlings. But over here, we call them European starlings. And these are, an invasive species. They're a non-native species. There was, I think, 100 of them released in Central Park in New York around, I forget what year, 1900-ish. And they just took off. They now covered the whole country. They really like certain kinds of human habitats. They really like farmland and like cattle grazing land. They really like hanging out around cows. So you tend to see them a lot if you're in those areas. And we have them in town. I used to be sort of anti-starling. They were on my list of birds that I officially did not like. And over time, I've come to appreciate them more. Like, I'm a non-native species around here too, in most ways. We're all just trying to make our way in the world, and species have been picked up and moved around, and they're what we have. They're probably not my favorite bird, but they are pretty fascinating and cool to look at. If you learn their sort of body plan, their overall silhouette, they're pretty easy to spot. They've got this stubby little tail, relatively long wings. When they're flying, they just look like a big triangle with those big triangular wings and hardly any tail. This is their breeding appearance when their beak gets bright yellow. This is what they look like more in the other times of the year. And sometimes the body is pretty dark without these highlights, but the beak is dark during the non-breeding season. And then the juveniles, the young starlings, look more like this. But they all have that basic starling shape. And again, they're very loud, and they're pretty distinctive, their vocalizations, once you learn them. So that will help you figure out that you're looking at a starling. Here's where they are found. Pretty much anywhere there are people in Santa Barbara County, you're going to find starlings. They're not really out in the backcountry up in the mountains, but they're around the agricultural areas and sort of the rural vineyards and horsey country out in the San Ynez Valley, as well as along the coast. And they sometimes occur in large numbers. And I'm going to skip their abundance animation, but they're all over North America. They're pretty much everywhere. So here's our next species. And I will play a recording by Daniel Hinckley first. So both of the two different kinds of vocalizations there. There's that rattle that you heard first, and then there's that sort of high bubbling call. That rattle is given by both sexes, but it's most frequently given by the females, which is kind of in the background and out of focus in this picture. These are brown-headed cowbirds. And but I'll come back to that rattle in a minute, because I learned some interesting facts about that while I was getting ready for this meeting. Here's another recording. This is by Thomas Megarian. So that very high whistle, that's a male cowbird song, I guess, is typically it's described, that's the song. But so cowbirds are interesting. They are nest parasites. So, unlike most birds which make a nest and lay their eggs in the nest, cowbirds don't make a nest. They go lay their eggs in another bird's nest. And that other bird then raises the cowbird's young. A female cowbird can lay up to 40 eggs during the breeding season, and they will go around and just lay their eggs and lay their eggs and lay their eggs. And the interactions between the cowbirds and the host species, the birds whose nests they're parasitizing, are really interesting. And the more I read about it, the more I realize that, oh, there's a lot more going on here than I used to think. And again, kind of like with the starlings, I had this anti-cowbird bias as a bird watcher for many years. And, they have been involved in some issues with some endangered species like Kirtland's warblers, which is a very rare species where the changes to habitat by human changes to the area have made more cowbird habitat. Cowbirds like forest edges. They like places where they can get in and get access to these other birds' nests. And so because of those kinds of habitat changes, cowbird impacts on their host species have in some cases had a negative effect on those host species to the point where they've actually had cowbird control efforts where they go and kill a bunch of cowbirds in an area in order to help the endangered species that would otherwise be parasitized by the cowbird. But in the more typical case, the cowbirds and the birds whose nests they are parasitizing have co-evolved over evolutionary timescales, and they have, behaviors that they engage in with respect to each other that, it's very interesting. And it's not just like a good guys, bad guys kind of thing, or at least as I've learned more about it, I've come to see it less as cowbirds are villains and the other birds are helpless victims. It's more like, well, they're just kind of part of this natural scheme of things, and they're each playing their own roles. And it is pretty interesting. Let's see, there's another photo here I've got. So here's a group of young cowbirds mixed in with some adults, and you can see they're kind of going through the transition. So these young cowbirds tend to be, sort of overall brownish with some streaking. And then at a certain point, as their adult plumage comes in, you get birds that look like this, where they've sort of got like a brown and black pattern, or this one up here. It can be confusing, but focus on the structure. The cowbird beak is pretty distinctive. It's a little shorter and thicker than a lot of other blackbirds' beaks. So that can help set you straight if you're confused about what species you're looking at. But just in terms of their life cycle, it really is interesting that young cowbirds, they grow up in another bird's nest, another species' nest. They're fed by another species, and yet they don't imprint on that other species, right? They don't go on and try to mate with that species. They on some level, they are programmed to know that they are cowbirds. At a certain point, as they're fledging and leaving the nest, they gravitate towards other cowbirds and they start associating with cowbirds. And there is some really interesting research I was reading about where the female cowbirds don't necessarily just lay their eggs and leave. They actually stay in the area, and they actually will keep track on some level of their offspring that are being raised in these other host species nests. And the females will use that rattle call to, in some sense, there's some sort of interaction going on where the rattle call of the female is communicating with the offspring in the other species nests, and they react to that rattle call, and it ends up being how they sort of, or it's part of the picture of how they end up finding other cowbirds and kind of, achieving their cowbird destiny as they grow up and are not like warblers or finches or whatever, the host species was whose nest they were laid in, they become cowbirds. I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I'm just talking vaguely and rambling, so I'll keep on going, but I encourage you to pay more attention to cowbirds and consider that maybe they're not just bad guys. They're actually pretty interesting in their own right. Here's where they are found in Santa Barbara County. They tend to cluster around human habitation. So we've got a lot of them along the south coast here, including in Carpinteria. We have a lot of them up in the Santa Ynez Valley, again, where there's more like rural country farms and ranches and stuff. Up here in the Cuyama Valley, again, there's farmland and ranch land up there. A little bit in the forests, in the backcountry, not as much. And that may also just partly reflect that there aren't as many bird watchers birding in those places. And I will take a look at their distribution because it's kind of interesting. So historically, they tended to associate with the bison herds in the Great Plains. So this was kind of their range. But with the human arrival and the clearing of forests and the establishment of a lot of farmland and grazing land and cattle, they've expanded their range as a result of human activity. And so this is their sort of annual cycle these days. So you can see in the breeding season, they spread out through pretty much, most of North America. And then in the winter months, they retreat from the snows. And but we have them pretty much throughout the year in our part of the country. So they are quite migratory, but again, we have them sort of year round, which is not an uncommon pattern. There's a lot of migratory species in North America that Southern California is just fine for them all year, and they'll stay here all year. All right, let's talk about this species. Here is a recording by Paul Marvin. This is a pretty distinctive call the species gives. They give them in flight a lot. If you have some blackbirds flying overhead and you're listening, a lot of times you'll hear these sort of chuck calls coming out. But you've got at least one of these birds in there. And then here's a typical song. So the titmouse in the background sounds like. Maybe a chickadee. Maybe both. This, of course, is the brewer's blackbird. Another one on the list of species that the bird names for birds people are trying to get renamed, since it's named after a human. This is a male, very pretty with this sort of glossy, colorful, iridescent plumage. The bright yellow eye is pretty distinctive. And here's a mixed group with a male and a bunch of females. And you see the females have dark eyes typically, although once in a while you'll find a female brewer's blackbird that has a light eye. Which can be confusing because it makes them look sort of like a rusty blackbird, which we'll look at in a minute. But the large majority of the time when you see a blackbird that looks like this, even if it has a light eye, it's still a female brewer's blackbird. And they are, typically found where there are people. They like those human habitats. As I say, the place I typically see a flock with brewer's blackbirds is down at the end of Linden Avenue and in Linden Field and the campground there. It's a good place to go watch blackbirds if you're interested in blackbirds. And I'll go on. I'm gonna pick up the pace so we get through the last of these species. Here's a recording for this species by Thomas Graves. The song sparrow in the background. Okay, and here is a song recording. This is by Richard Webster. And the yellow throat also. So this is this is a male, and they will display like this when they're giving that song sometimes. And this, of course, is a red-winged blackbird. And the red wings that they have, so these are the median coverts and lesser coverts, I want to say, these sort of wing covering feathers. And there's a lot of variability in how much of that colorful epaulet they show. Like when they're displaying like this, it's very prominent, and they puff it out and they make it really easy to see. But there are times where they normally have feathers covering it mostly, so you'll just see a little hint of color on the male birds. So they'll look kind of like these two birds do. There's a lot of variation there. So you don't expect to always see a big colorful patch on the shoulder, but look for little hints of it to let you know that's what you're seeing. And then the females look like this. And female red-winged blackbirds are famously confusing to beginning birders. Beginning bird watchers are always, it's sort of a rite of passage that as a beginning bird watcher, you have to stumble into the bird watchers group and say, I saw these really weird looking sparrows around my feeder or around the lawn. And you start describing them and you realize, oh yeah, they're not sparrows. They're female blackbirds. your female red-winged blackbird looks like this. And so, you know, focus on that beak structure. You know, it's a little too long and pointy for a sparrow, and that'll kind of set you straight. And they do often form single sex flocks. Like a lot of times you'll see a group of red-winged blackbirds that are just a group of females or just a group of males, or you see them mixed together as well. But you know, you can't rely on being able to identify them by the males necessarily, because you won't always see the males with them. Here's where they are found throughout Santa Barbara County. They like, again, sort of a recurring theme. They like human habitation, suburbs. They like water. You know, they like wetland habitats, sort of freshwater wetlands and cattails and tules and reeds, things like that. We have them in Carpinteria. Again, throughout much of the rest of the county, not so much in the backcountry, you know, not up in the chaparral, not up in the mountains, but at lower elevation, especially if you've got, you know, freshwater habitat, there's a good chance you've got red-winged blackbirds. And this is where they are found in North America. They're quite widely distributed. And again, they have sort of a similar pattern where in the breeding season, they extend out and up into Canada and across much of the country, much of the continent. And then in the winter, they retreat somewhat. But again, throughout the year, we have them in our part of California down here. All right, this fun species. So here is a recording by Andrew Spencer. So that's sort of a typical call. And then here's a recording of its song by Paul Marvin. And I just think this is the most amazing song. I have not heard these birds singing a lot. So when I was hearing this recording, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Just very different sounding to me. This sounds like some small animal being strangled, or it's just really a crazy sound. This is a tricolored blackbird. So it's very similar to the red-winged blackbird. The males, the big differences to look for are, you know, its epaulets, its colorful shoulder patch has this wide, very light colored border. And the red-winged blackbirds will often have a yellowish border as well, not necessarily as wide as the tricolored blackbird's border. But it's, you know, with the tricolored blackbirds, you very often see just that little whitish strip. You know, they'll have it mostly covered up. If you do see the red part, it tends to be a darker red than the red-winged blackbird's red patch. The red-winged blackbird's red patch has almost got an orangish kind of cast to it, whereas the tricolored blackbird is a very deep red. I don't know. The beak is supposed to be a little bit thinner and pointier on the tricolored than on the red-wing, although I can't say I've seen them enough to really get to where I can use that reliably. And the black, they're glossier. So the male tricolored blackbird is a very glossy kind of black, whereas the male red-winged blackbird is more of a flat black, not so shiny. But the shoulder patch, the colored shoulder patch, is the thing that I try to key in on, and I think is sort of, you know, the first thing most people look for. So this is kind of interesting. So this is up at the Cuyama Dairy in the Cuyama Valley. And it is, I mean, of any place in Santa Barbara County that I've found, if you really want to see blackbirds, this is the place to go. It's in eBird as a hotspot. The hotspot says restricted access in the hotspot name, but it is possible to bird there just from the public road. You don't need, you know, to get special permission to go there. And I'll show you a map just to kind of show where to go. But I mean, it's a long way to go just to see blackbirds unless you're really into your blackbirds. But if you happen to be up there, I certainly recommend it, even just for a quick stop, because it's quite a spectacle. So what you have there is, well, you know what, let me just go ahead and click through and show you kind of what I'm talking about a little better. So let me look at the map. So this is, so you go up in the Cuyama Valley, and you kind of go off on this road, and it's just very flat, and there's an orchard on one side, but you come to this area here. In fact, let me look at maybe I can show you this in another window. All right, let's see. I'll try to do this quickly so I don't lose people. This is interesting to me, and I don't want to just subject you to things that aren't that interesting to other people. But okay, so this is the dairy here. And I don't know, if you kind of look at it, you know, in 3D, it's just very flat country out here in the Cuyama Valley. You know, there's mountains here on the south and west side of it, but it's just very flat out here. And this is like a big feedlot, kind of, where there's just, you know, hundreds and hundreds of cows live here, and they bring trucks along and they dump their feed right out here along the edges, and the cows stick their heads out to feed. And this is the public road. You can drive along and just kind of pull off and just look at the birds there. And along with the cows, there are hundreds or thousands of blackbirds that you'll see right along here just feeding on this stuff. And I don't know, it looks like this. It's this, you know, this empty road out in the middle of nowhere. Well, I'm not denigrating the people who make their, you know, lives there, but it's very rural, and there are these cows and thousands of blackbirds just hanging out along here. So it is a neat place to go study blackbirds if that's something you had a mind to do. All right, we'll come back in here. And so oh, actually, you know, I'll just look at the checklist, because then I can go through bigger versions of the photos. So this is me going there when in January of this year, and, you know, ended up recording 960 starlings and 480 red-winged blackbirds and 720 tricolored and 190 cowbirds and 50 brewer's blackbirds. You know, I did not individually count those birds, but that was me basically estimating, I think there's 2,000 birds here, and of the ones I've really looked at, they're in roughly these proportions, and if you multiply it out, those are the numbers you get. So these are very rough numbers. But here's a good example. Here's some starlings and a tricolored blackbird kind of hanging out with the starlings. There's a big group of mostly tricolored blackbirds. I think there's a few starlings in there, and maybe a few red-winged blackbirds in there as well. Here they are flushing. And I think if you look at this photo, there's a few of the blackbirds whose wing patches are noticeably oranger, like this one up here, this one down here. I don't know. These are mostly tricoloreds, but not all. And here I wanted to play this recording too. So this is a recording I made in the orchard just east of the dairy. And it was just an amazing thing to listen to. I'm not sure this really conveys the effect. It was deafening at the spot. It was just like, oh, I'm listening to thousands of blackbirds. Sort of one of those great spectacles of nature like you see in a nature documentary, except it's next to a somewhat smelly pen with a few hundred cows in it. It was really fun bird watching. All right, on we go. Back to the usual content. So this is the eBird sightings map for tricolored blackbird. That red spot right there, that is the Cuyama Dairy. So when I made this map a few days ago, that was the only place in the county that had been reported in the last 30 days. So again, if you want to see those tricolored blackbirds, you got to go smell some cows. I mean, you don't have to, but that would be a good place to go. Actually, there's one up here too. So up in Casmalia, those up around Santa Maria and sort of rural country south of Santa Maria, Orcutt and Casmalia is a good place to go look for tricolored blackbirds. Tend to see them up there as well. They do occur down in the South Coast, but in like ones or twos, you might see one, you know, but if you want to see lots and lots of them, you go to the northern and western parts of the county or up in the Cuyama Valley in the northeast part of the county. I'm gonna skip that and we'll talk about this species. All right, this is a fun bird. It's not, I'm not sure how apparent it is, but these are big. These are much larger than your typical blackbirds. Here's a recording by Joseph Moreland. Actually, first I'll do a recording by Gualberto Becerra. And here's the recording by Joseph Moreland. Sorry, that was it. But they do that a lot. Like you'll hear that song. If you're in the right place, where they're around, you will hear them making that sound, and it's very distinctive. These are, in fact, great-tailed grackles. And they're like super big blackbirds. You know, this tail is like, I mean, the male with its tail behind it is like this long as it's flying through the sky. They're really large. And the females are also pretty sizable, although significantly smaller than the males. Here's the eBird sightings map. They've been spreading through Santa Barbara County, becoming easier to find over the last few decades. We do have them in Carpinteria. In fact, this red pin here is out at Lake Jocelyn, so out along the, along Foothill, just on the inland side of Carpinteria. Lake Jocelyn does not have water right now. It's a little, agricultural pond right off the road there, and the ag users there have drained it to use the water for their crops. But actually it now has a lot of really cool weeds growing in the lake bed. And I was there yesterday or the day before, I think the day before. And there were a bunch of buntings. I saw all these lazuli buntings. It was very cool because I really love seeing them. And mixed in with them was my first ever Santa Barbara County indigo bunting. So that was really fun. So if you checked it out on eBird, or if you saw my posting to the SBCO birding email list, there was a link to my eBird list. You can go see some very bad photos of the indigo bunting that I was excited to see there at Lake Jocelyn. But while I was there, there were great-tailed grackles. They like to hang out there, and they're flying back and forth over the site of the former lake. So that is a good place to see them. They're also, there's some good places to see them up in Santa Barbara. They are out there to be found. Go look at eBird. It'll tell you where to find them. Now let's do this species. This one is easy to recognize because it looks like its name. Here is a recording by Steve Hampton. So there's actually marsh wren in there as well, so ignore the marsh wren. And here is another recording by Ted Floyd of its song. And it's another one which just has this really wild song that I've read that it sounds like a rusty hinge. I've heard other people say it sounds like a small animal being strangled. It's just really interesting sound. Oops, and I went right past it. So this is a yellow-headed blackbird, and this is the male, and this is the female. They are pretty amazing looking if you can find them. This is where they occur in Santa Barbara County. I've seen them just show up at the Carpinteria Salt Marsh in ones and twos. Fall is a good time to see them there, but just kind of keep your eyes open. We don't have a lot of them around here. Again, if you go up to the Cuyama Dairy, that's the most reliable place I've found to see them. There's often a group of them there hanging out with the thousands of other blackbirds. There are some other places you can see them, but we have them in small numbers in Santa Barbara County, not in big numbers. All right, and our last species. This is a recording by Frank Lambert. And this is a recording by Doug Hines. This is the rusty blackbird. So it's about the same size as a brewer's blackbird. The thing to look for is it's sort of, brownish. The extent of this rusty